Hello there, my name is Salim Javed and I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Mass Communication and Media Technology at SJT University. As you know that we are producing a series of videos where we are trying to understand cinema. In the last video we talked about how the cinema started in India. We talked about Marius Sisser, how he brought Lumiere Brothers film in India. Then we talked about then we talked about Pathankar, then we talked about Pitale, then we talked about Bhatvadekar, then we talked about Hiralal Sen, then we talked about J.F. Madan. Now, let's talk now about a wonderful development which is basically Nanabhai Govind Chitre and Ramchandra Gopal Torne. Now, Nanabhai Govind Chitre and Ramchandra Gopal Torne, these people actually they attempted a film called Pundalik, and they released this film on May 18, 1912 with another Hollywood film called A Dead Man's Child in Coronation Theatre in 1912. Now, this particular film called Pundalik is at the helm of controversy actually with another film which I'll be talking about, which is called Rajaharishan. Now let's understand the background of these two films and then we will talk about what is the controversy. Now, Rajaharishan, everybody knows about this film, which is considered as the first feature film of India, and which was directed by which is directed by Dada Sahab Phalke. Dada Sahab Phalke is known, or the full name of Dada Sahab Phalke is Dhundiraj Govind Phalke, who is popularly known as Dada Sahab Phalke. Now, this Pundalik and Rajaharishan. Now, these two films are, there is a debate which is related with these two films. Like many people actually believe that Pundalik is the first feature film of India, critique actually, and then some critique believe that Pundalik is not the first feature film of India. It is basically Rajaharishan, which is the first film of India. Now, before we talk about Rajaharishan and Pundalik, there is a very interesting block of information in between these two films. There is a film called Savitri, which was shot by Pathankar and Divakar around 1912, and the print, when this film was developing, the print got damaged. And then there was another film by the name of which is basically about Ram killing the Ravan. So there was a third kind of an attempt also in between. So not only we are just talking about Pundalik and then this film Rajaharishan, we are also talking about Savitri. Then we are also talking about this film which is about where Ram is killing the Ravana, and how these Savitri and Ram killing the Ravana, they were not found. So only there is a reference of these two films available. Now, so Rajaharishan was released in 1913, and this Coronation Theatre, and this now, before I jump into the controversy, so now let me give you a background of Rajaharishan. Now, in 1910, Dada Sahab Phalke basically saw a film. In English, it is written The Life of Christ, and the actual film that he saw was Vie au Passion de Christ. So, Vie Passion de Christ, or Life of Christ. Now, after watching this film, Dada Sahab Phalke thought that why not we make our indigenous film? Now, making this indigenous film, the idea looks very fantastic, but it took him a lot of time and a lot of resources to arrange required money and other things to go to England for buying the equipments. And not only buying was important, training himself in this process of filmmaking was also important. There is a fantastic story how Dada Sahab Phalke, acquired money, then how he went to England, how he impressed one person there, and then how that person actually took him to different places. There is where he brushed up his technical skills, and how later on, and that person was like 100% impressed by the technical prowess of what Dada Sahab was holding at that point of time, and how he convinced him that I want to go back to India and I want to make films. So he came back in 1912 and he started the production of Rajaharishan in 1912. But the film was released in 1913, May 13, 1913. So the production of the film started somewhere in 1912, but the film was released in May 13, 1913. So please understand, doesn't matter when the production starts of a film, that date is like all right, but the films are known by their release dates. Now this is how this thing is. Now let's talk about Pundalik and Rajaharishan. Now there are critiques on both the sides. Okay, at one end you have Arnab Jandeka, Sumit Narwekar, and this Firoz Rangoonwala, and on the other hand we have P.K. Nair, the celluloid man, he's famously known as. Now think of these two groups. One is saying that Pundalik is our first feature film because it is being shot properly, there are people involved, and obviously for the development of this film, it went to England, and the cinematographer of this film was a foreigner. But the attempt, the film should be considered for its attempt. So this is what the argument was of Arnab Jandeka and Sumit Narwekar and Firoz Rangoonwala. Whereas P.K. Nair said that if you consider this point, and this Dead Man, this film was released with another Hollywood film, so that is a small point, so that's not that important point. But P.K. Nair said that all the things said is fine, but then if that is the criteria, then why you are not considering films made by Hiralal Sen? I told you in 1903 he shot a film Ali Baba and 40 Thieves. So at that point of time I was saying that I'll talk about it here. So he said that you should also consider films of Hiralal Sen, or you should also consider film of Tipnis, Torne, other films also, which were mere recording of the plays. So if it is a mere recording which you are considering as the feature film, then you should consider earlier film also. Why only Pundalik? So then later on it was settled that Rajaharishan is the first film of India. Now Rajaharishan 1913, then World War I took place. Then after that, another very important change which is in the history of Indian cinema is the Cinematography Act of 1918. Now there's so much to talk about Cinematography Act 1918. What was the socio-political reason that it came into being, how Britishers were in a mood to even govern what you were seeing, and how things were happening. Now Bhakt Vidhur, which was released in 1921, becomes the first banned film of that time. Now it's an episode which has been taken from Mahabharat, but the problem was not with Mahabharat. Basically the attirical resemblance which was with Gandhiji was basically the problem became one of the reasons for banning this film. It was released around Rolek Act, and this film was banned in Madras, Karachi, and other provinces also. Now this becomes the first film which is basically the first banned film in in British India. But in independent India, there is another film called Neele Akashe Niche, Neele Akash Ke Niche, basically, which was made by in 1959 by Mrinal Sen, which becomes the first banned film of India. Now, when we talk about this first banned film, there is another film, basically, Sarayandhari, which is made by Baburao Mistry, or popularly known as Baburao Painter. Now, this actually film was not banned, but it attracted censors' scissors. Why it attracted? There is a very interesting point, that it attracted Census Board scissor for projecting a very realistic slaying of Kichak by Bhim. Now, this may sound very interesting, that you have made the film so realistic that Censor Board is saying that people will not be able to, grasp it. So please remove this part. And that was the power of Baburao Painter. Baburao Painter, like as I said in the in one of my videos, that if you're talking about the early history of early Indian cinema, and if you're not talking about J.F. Madan, if you're not talking about Baburao Painter, and if you're not talking about Dada Saheb Phalke, we are not talking about early Indian history and earlier Indian film history at all. So such was the power of Baburao Painter, that he directed the shot so perfectly that Censor Board asked him to remove the scene. Now, he made a lot of interesting films like Surekha Haran in 1921, then he made Singhad in 1923, Kalyan Khajina in 1924, Shah Shah in 1925, Rana Hamid in 1925, and Maya Bazar in 1925. Now, very interesting fact about Maya Bazar is that this film has the credit to have the first poster in the history of Indian cinema. So, and it was Baburao Painter who made the first poster for his film. And Baburao Painter not only made the first poster, he was a man who was making a lot of literature related to his films. He was making detailed pamphlets related to his films, and he was painting some eye-catching posters for his films. He was a master stenographic artist, and he was not only just a master stenographic artist, he was basically somebody who was, I would say he was ahead of his time, because he was aware of actors blocking. Now, what is actors blocking? Now, think of that, right now I am sitting in this frame, and I'm composed in a certain way, and I'm talking to you. Now, suppose if there are two people in the same frame, they will not be composed the way I am composed right now. So they will be composed slightly differently, so that if there is a master shot, you can see both the people in one go, then you cut in between the close-up and everything. Now, this technically, and when you have movement and everything, then it becomes complicated. So Baburao Painter was aware of this blocking, which is like a very new kind of information when you are reading the history of Indian cinema. And another credit that Baburao Painter has is introducing artificial lighting to Indian film industry. And he did it in Singhad, which was released in 1923. So he has a lot of credits. First film poster, a brilliant director, a master poster making artist, brilliant stenographic artist, knows his craft, making literature related to films. All the publicity and PR thing that we do today, you can trace back it to Baburao Painter. And then Baburao Painter, when he was in the process, then he was joined by very eminent people. And those eminent people were basically V. Shantaram, everybody knows about V. Shantaram, then Damle and Sheikh Fateh Lal, and these three people later on, Damle, Sheikh Fateh Lal and V. Shantaram later on made their own studio, Prabhat Studios. Now, the beginning of the second decade of the last century, the beginning of the second decade of the last century, which makes it 1920. Around that time, 1921, a brilliant, what would I say, a gust of relief, a gust of fresh air, which is a rare comedy, which is a rare commodity, and I'm talking about a comedy called Vilayat Farid, or the English name of this film is England Return, which was made by Dhirendranath Gangopadhyay and Dhirendra Ganguly, or people simple call him DJ. Now, this film was basically so refreshing for people that it made enormous sum in a limited time. Now, when you are talking about comedy is a rarity. I always say, if you ask me which genre is the most difficult genre to make, I would say it's comedy, which is, according to me, is the most difficult genre. Now, by 1926, we have a very charismatic personality, which is Fatima Begum, and she is the first female producer of Indian film industry. She made a film called Bulbul-e Paristan. Now, this is something that I'm talking about 1926. Now, think of that time that we as an industry had so much of space for everyone, that anybody can come and do the creative work that he or she is interested in. Almost 90 years after that, if I ask you how many female producers, directors we have, if somebody counts, the number can, numbers can be very disappointing. There is not, now there is a representation, but not in the form as it is desired. And I'm talking about 1926, where there is a lady who comes and becomes the first, female producer of India. Now, there is another very interesting thing which is going in the background when I'm talking about 1926. Now, in 1926, you have Don Juan, a Warner Brothers film, which has a synchronous background score and sound effect going on. So I'm talking about 1926, I'm talking about Fatima Begum in India, whereas in 1926 I'm talking about another development which is taking place in Hollywood because of a lot of new inventions in the field of radio. So by 1926 we have a film called Don Juan, which was released by Warner Brothers. In the next year, which makes it 1927, you have another film called The Jazz Singer, which actually officially ended the silent era in Hollywood and gradually in other industries also. And then we have The Light of New York, which was released in 1928. It has everything synchronous. So in Don Juan, we have only the music, the background score and the sound effect synchronous. In The Jazz Singer, we have not only the background or the sound effect, but also the dialogues and singing also. And by The Light of New York, which is 1928, by the time this film comes, you have everything in sync. Now, why I told you this development when I'm talking about the history of Indian cinema? Now, this development actually affects films to come. Now, what sort of a development is going to happen? Now, I'm talking about 1927 Jazz Singer, and immediately after that, 4 years later, on 14 March 1931, we have our Alamara, the first talkie film of India. Now, why it took so much of time? There are very interesting reasons for that. J.J. Madan, the son of J.F. Madan, actually saw this Jazz Singer in US on one of his trips, and he wanted to make the first talkie of India. for which he had an empire of cinema halls. So he started upgrading his cinema halls in India, Ceylon, Burma, everywhere, and which actually became one of the main reasons among many for the decline of Madan Film Company later on, because his empire was huge. In 1925 they had a fire in their godown, so it was like a lot of things were going out of the way, but he wanted to be the first one to introduce talkies film in India. But unfortunately he was not the man who made the first talkie of India. It was Khan Bahadur Adesher Irani, whom we know as Adesher Irani, who actually made the first talkie of India, and that film was released on 14th March 1931. Now, there is very interesting development around this fact. Like, it is very easy to remember that on 14th March 1931, Alamara was released. Adesher Irani was the director of that film. They used Tanar sound system. Adesher Irani himself took care of the sound, and it was the first talkie of India. But there is so much happening with this film that if you sit down, think deeply, then you would understand that this particular film gave birth to a lot of other things. Now, what is that? The first thing, when you say it's the first talkie of India, when you say it's the first talkie of India, what are you actually doing? Now, this point onwards, there will be Kannada film, there will be Tamil film, there will be a Telugu film, there will be a Hindi film, there will be a Punjabi film, there will be a Bhojpuri film, there will be a Chinese film, there will be a Japanese film. As long as language was not there, they were films. And when language came, I'm talking about Jaisinghar also, it's not that I'm just only talking about Alamara. But as the language came, suddenly there is a geographical boundary. So it's a English film, it's a Russian film, it's a Japanese film, it's a Chinese film, it's a Korean film, it's a film is from England. Now, when you watch Charlie Chaplin, you don't need to belong to any country. You know, you just watch Charlie Chaplin just like that. When you watch Keaton Buston, you don't have to, belong to a country, and you're not governed by the fact, okay, this film is that. When you're watching a silent film like Vilayat Farhat, it's not just an Indian film. It's a film. But the moment you say that we have our first talkies, we are actually divided by the language. So now, after this, like in 1913 or 1914, there was a film made in South India also, but a lot of other things were also happening. But I'm not saying that was a Kannada film or that was a Tamil film. That was a hardcore Indian film made in India. But with Alamara, and after this point, now another conflict that it says that the film was made in Hindustani Zaban. Now, Hindustani Zaban is what? It is a mixture of Hindi and Urdu, and then it was backed by, obviously, the Parsi theatre. So, if I say that somebody comes to me and say, Salim sir, what sort of a film you would like to make? I will say, I'll make a Hindi film, because I am not from Punjab, so I will not make a Punjabi film. So that is what is with this fact. And another very interesting factor that comes with this Alamara, which is 14th March 1931. There's nothing wrong with Alamara, please understand. Alamara is from where we started our talkie film. But I'm making you understand that when one thing happens, there are so many changes with that one change that it becomes difficult to grasp what is happening. Now think of Sulochana or Ruby Meyer. Okay, she was of Jewish ancestry. So Ruby Meyer was the first choice of Adesher Irani, that I want Ruby Meyer or Sulochana in this film. Now this ravishing and highest paid actress of that point of time in India was dropped from the film. Why? Because she did not know that Zaban, okay, Hindustani Zaban. And she was so heartbroken by this fact that she almost withdrew herself from industry, took 1 year to learn the language, and what a commendable comeback she made. But she could not be the part of this milestone called Alamara. Another very interesting development with this film. Now, suppose you think of Charlie Chaplin, you think of Buster Keaton, you think of all these people. Now, when you are, suppose if I'm an actor and I have been trained to perform without words. So if I say I have to show you surprise. So how would I do that? In silent era I would do like something like this. But when words came, with Alamara, when words came, then you were doing it like, oh. So this entire, body, the entire structure of performance changed. And a lot of people, not only actors, a lot of directors were very adamant to shift from silent films to talkies. Some of them stated that the aesthetics that we have developed with silent films would die with talkies. Babu Rao Painter was adamant, and he was like that, we should not opt for talkies. So think of actors, and the crisis also gave opportunity to different kind of actors also. Actors who were performing with theatres, they were good with dialogue delivery. So overnight, actors, those who were performing with body, and actors who were not only just performing with body but dialogue also, there was this complete switch. And that is what, with Alamara, we enter in a different phase of filmmaking in India. There is so much to talk about when it comes to history of early Indian cinema or the history of Indian cinema. I hope to continue this series and see you in the next video, next program. Till then, take care and thank you so much.